Trinity Radio streaming live to YouTube and Twitter. Yes, Twitter.
Greetings and welcome to Trinity Radio. I'm Jonathan Pritchett, and along with me is
Braxton Hunter.
And yes, we are streaming live to both YouTube and Twitter, formerly or currently known as X. And we're happy to be here. We're happy to have all of you here with us today. We are going to go over Alex O'Connor's objections to the story of Adam and Eve. And he was talking to somebody.
I never can remember this guy's name. He's like Jordan Peterson's best friend.
Jonathan something?
Jonathan something starts with a P, maybe?
Yeah. Anyway, I found this video quite interesting, and I thought that we would go through it and see what the objections are. Whenever somebody objects to anything in Scripture, my first instinct to respond is get over it, Pago. There we go. Tough, suck it up, because I'm just kind of over all of these sorts of, I can't believe the Bible would blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like,
I'll tell you the thing, Pritchett, that bothers me. It doesn't bother me. It gives us content, but it bothers me that it's out there is these. So I think of Alex O'Connor, and I know not everyone's going to agree with this, but I think of him as more thoughtful, more willing to admit when he was wrong about something or see something in a new way. Famously, he said, maybe I shouldn't refer to myself as atheist anymore, because it is true that in the academic literature, it's referring to someone who maintains the position that there is no God. And he says, and I'm not that. So, he's been reasonable, and he's gone to school for theology and all those kind of things. And he's been now very prominent. Yet at the same time, these takes that he has on Genesis 1 are the same takes that I would hear from someone who just started their channel on YouTube. Now, I've communicated with Alex, and we've had a friendly relationship before. We were supposed to debate at one time. And so I don't mean, I know that could seem insulting, but he's often gives thoughtful takes. So when I see something like this, it surprises me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I like the guy. I like when he's on with Piers Morgan and they're arguing about the monarchy or something, but in general, it's just my first instinct is to always say, get over it. But I understand that people do have certain hangups about passages in the Bible that I have long since gotten over, I guess. I can't say that I never had hangups about the Bible, but I'm just saying it's like, why are we, the older I get, the more I'm like, whatever. But,
well, we're going to jump right into it in a minute, but I do want to say, the important thing is here going into this is I run into there's two reactions that Christians and atheists will have when they first discover the worldview space and these atheist and Christian videos and all that. One reaction is to say something like, you know what? I don't, as a Christian, I would listen to a debate or something and I'd be like, I don't know how our guy's going to respond to that. And then the guy has a response that is actually more plausible than the alternative. And atheists in that perspective will hear some atheist objection to the Bible or to Christianity, and they'll have this, well, that just proves everything. I'm not saying Alex is thinking that way. This is like your first year cage stage atheist type guy. And then to the rest of us, we're like, to those of us who've been doing this for a while, we look at it and we're like, wait a minute, wait, what? Like that? I remember when I was first concerned about that way back, but you're saying that with all this confidence, like it just shows the problems with everything. So I guess one of the things I do appreciate about Alex is, even though he is bringing some of those concerns, he is saying like, hey, somebody help me out with this. So here we are.
Yeah. And before we get into listening to what he has to say about his objections, I would like to remind you that Braxton and I are seminary professors at Trinity College of the Bible and Theological Seminary, and you can become a student and take classes from not only us, but from people like Dr. Leighton Flowers and Dr. Steve Gregg and Dr. Chris Featherstone and Dr. Tim Stratt and Dr. Jim Chatham and many others. If you go to trinitysem.edu, that's trinitysem.edu, and fill out an evaluation form, and our admissions department will be in contact with you shortly, where you can get a theological education at a price you can afford from the comfort of your own home, learning from professors you've actually heard of before.
You're here.
If you would like to become a patron and support what we're doing on the channel here at Trinity Radio, you could do that by going to patreon.com/Trinity Radio. And we have tons of wonderful extra content over there that I invite you to go peruse, sign up, become a patron. And
Just put 2 new things on there yesterday, including the after show that's going to be right after this one, whenever this one ends. And so thank you, Jonathan. Now with the commercials out of the way, at least for the moment, how about we move on to the clip?
All right, here we go. We're starting in the middle-ish.
So here are some of the objections. The first thing is to say that it seems like if the serpent is lying and is evil and is the devil, then Eve is somehow deceived here. She's deceived by a half-truth. She's fooled into eating the fruit. And when she does so, not only is she punished for something which she was fooled into doing, but now her descendants are also punished for a crime that they did not commit, but rather one of their ancestors committed, and arguably didn't do so knowingly.
Okay, well, that's one objection.
Yeah, so my initial take on this is bound up with a further objection he has, because he's right when he goes back and explains what he sees as a problem about this is the fact that the serpent seems to be telling the truth here, and God even seems to grant to some degree what the serpent says later, and that's why they can't have access to the tree of life and live forever. So it's connected to this further question about what did Adam and Eve know? Were they childlike? Oftentimes, though he didn't do this, I don't think. Atheists will say, well, it's like these were like children. And so, of course, you can't expect, and they'll compare it. Like Rationality Rules made a video one time where he was comparing it to a guy who has 2 little toddler children, and well, it's not like that. Just like they were created, if you just go with what's in the story, they were created already in an adult form. And obviously already with some prerequisite cognitive knowledge and abilities. And they, at least Adam, could have been told. I mean, he's told not to touch, he's not told not to touch it, but he's told not to eat from the tree and all of that sort of thing. And so he has some propositional knowledge about the tree. And this is the big crux that it affects this one and whether the Satan is being deceptive. And a later objection that's more direct to this, and that is, what did they know when they went to eat the tree? Because when they went to eat the tree, they could have well known everything about what could happen, what it would be like, all of that propositionally. But when you eat the tree, now you have the experiential knowledge of actually the knowledge of evil, what it's like in that sense, like knowing someone physically in the Bible and knowing this thing. So it's like, and then I'll wrap up on this, Pritchett, but it's like cigarettes. Like if you've never smoked cigarettes, you could know everything academically about smoking cigarettes, about what they're made of, about how people feel, what the statistical information is, all that. You can know everything about cigarettes, but that's not the same as having the knowledge of cigarettes that comes with smoking the cigarettes and now understanding, oh, this is what it's like. And that toothpaste can never be put back in that bottle. So in terms of the deception, I think Eve had some prerequisite knowledge about this going into it, propositional knowledge.
Yeah, and she botched it when she recounted to the serpent what God said. Not only the part where she added to it, which a lot of people point out that you shall not even touch it, but even the way that she says you'll die is different than the way God had told Adam. Because if you look at the construction of the phrases in the Hebrew, they're different. So there's a difference there. And a lot of people point out that the way that Yahweh says it to Adam is you're basically, when you eat it, you're going to die, on the day that people think that this is like, they're going to instantly drop dead, which is not really what's being said there. It's just, as our friend Chris Date likes to point out, it just means when, and you're going to die. It's kind of like a death sentence, but that doesn't necessarily mean an instantaneous drop dead. But that does seem to be the way that Eve understands it. and why the serpent can deceive her and say no. So she not only botched the "you can't touch it," which was never said, but also the idea of how the death occurs just by, as if it's the ark, or, offering strange fire in the temple, or lying about your money and givings to the Holy Spirit, and you drop dead in front of Peter. That's not what's really happening here. And also, I mean, just to be clear, this could be typology for all women, daughters of Eve, to explain, pain in childbirth. It could just mean sorrow, though.
Wait, are we going to get to that specifically in a minute? Or
Well,
is that...
he said, "Why are all women cursed and punished for this?"
Oh,
And
yeah, he did say
that. It just says to the woman, he said, "I will greatly multiply your pain," and that could just mean sorrow, and that could anticipate not having the comforts of the garden once they're expelled from it. It could,
right. That's kind of similar to the thing with Adam's curse of saying, well, now thorns and thistles. And some people think that means that God's going to do a second act of creation and make things like thorns and thistles, when in reality, it means you're going to have to go out and work the field outside of the garden now.
Yeah. Yahweh has blessed this garden. It was a garden before Adam showed up to cultivate it. So God was doing some maintenance for it. It's not to say that thorns and thistles were created ex nihilo after,
right.
After they were exposed. There could have been thorns and thistles all over the rest of the earth,
Yeah. And on that point, Jonathan, or before we move on from the whole Eve thing, I want to point out that we could say something for those who take this story as it is written. Then there is the further question of, okay, yes, he didn't say you shall not touch it, and that sounds somewhat like putting a hedge around the law, like the Pharisees would do, and they're so concerned that you're going to go past the law or transgress the law that they make up new rules so that you don't even go anywhere near it, that sort of thing. But also, there's this question of it sounds like Eve was maybe in the vicinity, like of the tree. Now, the tree of life was there too, and she was to eat from the tree of life, but she was in the vicinity of this tree that he's referring to it in her presence, and he's talking about it in her presence. Some have said, well, maybe you have Eve here. She was already somewhat tempted by this and was sitting here thinking about it. But I don't know that we can go that far, because both of these trees were in the midst of the garden, and she could eat from the tree of life.
Yeah, someone way smarter than both of us about this subject has chimed in, Dr. Joel Karitko. He says, many think the pain in childbearing relates to the attempt to have kids and the problems that come with trying to have families more than just physical pain at birth. Yeah, and I think that there's something to that, though. Like I said, either way, and that's kind of the way pain or sorrow or whatever, that's kind of the way that I pretty much lean. I don't necessarily think, because we all understand that women having babies is, they give them anesthesia for a reason, but it's not like, because we know that women are in pain, we retcon that and said, well, it might not have hurt so bad prior to the fall. And then now it all hurts bad for all women everywhere.
Which he brings up as a criticism is that sounds like it was already painful in the garden, and it's being increased now outside of the garden. Now that brings up, and he speaks of that as though it's a problem, because I think of this really clinical, sanitized drywall air conditioning idea that nothing of any kind of pain happens in the garden or in heaven.
Right.
And I don't think that's necessarily the case.
I don't either. This idea, Adam would have never stubbed his toe in Eden, ever.
Right.
And if it did, it wouldn't have hurt. Where are we getting these ideas from? Adam is a dust man, right? I mean, where do all these? It seems like there's a lot of ideas, and I'm not saying that this is on Alex either. I've heard Christians, come up with all kinds of theories about this.
Well, it's like if you talk about the new heaven and the new earth and having a physical resurrected body there, and will we have tasks and jobs to do? Yeah, I think so. That's purpose, that's meaning in serving God, right? Well, isn't there something kind of pleasurable and kind of good in a little pain? Like you work long and hard all day, and then you have this pain in your muscles just a little bit. It's kind of like it's a good thing. And I've never understood that it's so foreign to how we experience things now, that there is, I mean, after all, pain is a part of the design and it's a good thing. It becomes a problem when it's extended out and becomes terminal, or in some way it's severe suffering. But a little pain, I don't know whether, and I think this text kind of demonstrates that, because I think Alex ends up being right about what he's saying, but wrong that this is a problem, right?
Yeah.
I think,
Well,
yeah.
I think as technology has advanced throughout the centuries, I think that the idea of our relative comfort compared to people just 200-300 years ago, it seems like the idea of Eden would be, you will never stub your toe. There could be no pain anywhere ever at all, because we have such a low threshold for pain and an aversion to having any pain because of our heightened state of comfort and leisure that we have in the 21st century. It's like, that's not the history of the world, and that's obviously not how the original audience would have been thinking. Like, oh, they never experienced any sort of
right. I was watching this debate between Andrew Wilson and Andrew Wilson's wife, rather, and this anti-natalist person, and it gave you the impression that, like, she can't imagine, this anti-natalist can't imagine living with a certain threshold of pain, so people should never have to experience that threshold of pain. And it's like, well, hold on a second. You realize that people in the ancient world, like, if you had a tooth, an infected gum, or you had a tooth problem, that could be a horrific problem, horrific, agonizing pain that you really can't get relief from. It was just a much grittier place and a grittier world. And I'm not sure they would have some of the same reactions as we do to some of this. By the way, I want to say, Joel, if you'd like to jump on, I'd be happy for you to jump on if you'd like to. So just let me know. You could probably provide some good context here. So let's go back. Well, one other thing, Pritchett, and I'm sorry to drag this out, but we were just talking about Adam, and you were talking about, basically this is saying, when you eat of this tree, you'll die, in the sense that death will be now on the table. We could be like, in context, this makes a lot of sense, because they were sent out of the garden. And the whole reason they were sent out of the garden is to carry out this thing, because if they were allowed, God speaks amongst himself, right? He said, well, we have to let them out of the garden now, because otherwise they'll eat of the tree and live, right? When you told them you wouldn't live. So that has always kind of explained it to me. But the word for day, we often hear, like today, could be, a day. It could be a period of time, like the whole thing of, not sound like Ken Ham, but in this context, in my father's day, it took 3 days to drive across his land during the day. So you have an age, like my father's day, you have 3 days, that's 3 24-hour periods. And then to drive across my father's field in the day, like during the daylight, right? So you had 3 different senses of that. And so it makes sense to look at that word here and just say, well, this seems to be communicating the day. And it could literally even refer to the day if they were expelled from the garden that day, right? So, and I'm not sure, I'd have to look at the text if there's any indication that they didn't leave that very day, but they were cut off from life in that day. It's like, is it Abimelech or Pharaoh, when Abraham has the issues with him about Sarah, and he says, say that you're my wife, and it was a half truth because they both had the same father, Terah. That's a whole other deal. But when that happens, I think one of them says, I'm dead, or something like that. And it's like, well, he didn't mean to say he was in a state without consciousness in his human body or something like that. It was like, I'm as good as dead. So anyway, that's probably enough on that.
Yeah.
Not only that, but because she's eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, this implies that before she ate of the tree, she didn't have a knowledge of good and evil. So if she's being punished for doing something evil and bad, then it seems incongruous that she would be punished for doing something evil and bad before she had a knowledge of what was evil and bad, because she hadn't eaten of the fruit yet. So again, it seems unfair to punish her for doing something that she can't have known was bad.
This is where I have you kind of touched on this already, but this is where I think that loses any sort of, this idea that let's take it at face value that they had no propositional, experiential kind of knowledge, any kind of knowledge about good and evil. You don't need that any more than a child does to understand to understand the principle or whatever of obedience and disobedience. Like children, they don't have to have a greater understanding of like good and evil in order to understand, don't eat this, right? Don't do that. Children may not have any sort of conceptual understanding of good and evil in the larger, or how to just much less discern between good and evil, but that doesn't mean they have no understanding or concept of obedience and disobedience and consequence, because apparently they understood enough to know, because Eve, even though she botched it, she understood some sort of, if we do this, which we're not supposed to do, there's a consequence for doing that. So implicit in the text itself is an understanding of obedience, disobedience, and consequence.
This is exactly what I was hoping you'd bring out, Pritchett, because it proves, I dare say prove, and you're not supposed to say prove, but to my mind, this proves what I'm saying about propositional versus experiential knowledge, because did she have propositional knowledge about evil? Well, what does that mean? That means you know about certain things that are evil, right? That eating of the tree would be something evil because God told you not to do it. You know that. You also know the consequences. How much do you need to know before it can be said about you that you know good and evil, in the sense that you have propositional knowledge? And if that's the case, because she did already have propositional knowledge, at least some of it, then the only thing it can be referring is the experiential knowledge.
Yeah. And it's interesting if you look at, good and evil in 1 Kings chapter 3. What does Solomon ask for? He wants to be able to discern between good and evil, right? And Yahweh is pleased with that, because he didn't ask for riches for himself. He didn't ask for his enemies or whatever, but he wanted to be able to do justice. And he says, okay, I'm going to do this. And God calls this wise. That's why when he asked for discernment of wisdom, that's why we say Solomon asked for wisdom, because that's what God called it. God called it wisdom. But Solomon said just wanted to be able to discern between good and evil, for capable of judging others as great people of yours. That's what he wanted to know. And he says, but God says in verse 12, behold, I have given you a wise and discerning heart. That's why we say he asked for wisdom, but what he really asked for was the ability to discern between good and evil. It's not that Solomon didn't know good and evil existed by that point, right, for sure. But what he wanted was to be able to discern between the two, right? And that requires wisdom. And that's something that Adam and Eve lacked, which is why they weren't able to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right?
And so this answers his question in the sense that it's not as though they were like children with no cognitive information about good and evil. It's that they now know evil, right? Yeah. So anyway,
they know that consequence is what is the consequence? Oh, it's going to be really, really bad. Adam and Eve, sin was taking for this. See, I agree with that, kind of. But we'll go through some of this, and then we might get to flesh that out later, because I think that's going to come up as far as his objections.
The third question I would raise is why the serpent is there in the first place. If the serpent is this evil creature that's sort of crawling around Eden, why is the serpent in paradise in the first place? Why would God place him there? Why would God allow the serpent to be there? Fourthly...
Okay, so why would God allow the serpent to be there, Braxton?
Well, so my take on this is, and we could talk a little bit about the serpent, by the way, because I think it was Hank Hanegraaff that even said, and if I'm wrong about that, I'm sorry, but I think that's right. It was like, well, however you take this, the serpent didn't have vocal cords and stuff, so the serpent couldn't be talking. Well, I'm not sure that a serpent needs vocal cords for a spirit to speak through it. We had Balaam's donkey speaking to him, and whatever vocal apparatus he had, he certainly didn't have the genetic stuff that you would need to have the kind of speech that we have now. But why would he let it there? Well, the very simple and direct answer is also the reason why I think there was a tree of the knowledge of good and evil there, and not just the tree of life. And it's that God, we find out in the New Testament that what God wanted was people to love the Lord their God and love their neighbor as theirself, right? It's all about love. The whole law boils down to love. That's Jesus's teaching. All right. So it's all about love. But according to us who are not Calvinists and believe in compatibilism, I don't think, unless you have a robust understanding of free will, libertarian free will, that you're going to have meaningful love. Now, that's not to say if you don't believe in libertarian free will, you can't have love. But if libertarian free will is not the case, I think that what you have ultimately is not a story of love. You have God deterministically making it such that people will worship him and all that sort of thing. So since that's my background, since the Bible seems to talk about love, since you can't have love without free will is in the way I'm understanding it, then if you're God and you're going to create man, you have to create with the understanding that they will use that freedom for both good and for evil, for love and also for evil. And so in order to have a real, true, free relationship of love, real love, then what you would have to do is you'd have to have something in the garden for man to sacrifice. The Bible is very rich with all of this stuff about sacrifice, and sacrifice is connected with worship. But for our purposes here, you something that you're giving up that you could have out of obedience or love for that other person. And so the tree needs to be there. It's not setting them up for failure. The serpent, perhaps, now this is my speculation, is allowed to be there for this same reason, is because they had to be able to sacrifice something in love, or else this isn't really the kind of freedom that we want. So that results in the highest form of love. So they had that there, and ultimately they chose to rebel against God. And then, of course, through the Old Testament, we have a system of sacrifice to demonstrate your love for God instead of doing just any old thing you want to do. And so I think it fits hand in glove with the story of choice that we see throughout the Bible.
Yeah. The serpent is a chaos creature, not necessarily an actual snake. I'm kind of fine with that. I think that's what it represents, but I don't have a problem with it actually just being like when we think of serpent, snake. And I think that's the imagery that is evoked in the passage in the original as well. So I agree with you. That's what it represents. Now,
he also says in this text that Alex says that it never says in the text that the serpent is this character that we think of as the Satan or the devil. But of course, in the book of Revelation, for those of us who believe in the inspiration of the Holy Spirit of God, in the book of Revelation, we find out that old serpent, the devil and Satan. So it's like pretty explicit there, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, but even if you don't want to accept all of that, okay, that's fine. But if it's going to be an internal critique about this and how it fits with, God's sense of justice and all of that, you got to put on the whole robe of Christianity. So we can say it's that. Yeah. Does this text say that? No, this is an unfolding story, right? And we're on page 2 or page 3 of the story. Come on, right? Read to the end and you find out, oh, that's what that was going on from the beginning, right? Okay, so hey, look, plot twist. It's fine. I don't understand why people can't let the Bible be what it is. Anyway, but whatever it is, I agree that it represents chaos, right? And I don't read anywhere in chapter 2 where the Lord God says, I'm going to keep all chaos agents out of the garden. I see that he gives Adam responsibilities in the garden, and probably one of them is to keep out chaos agents, right? So he's got to tend and cultivate it. So I don't know why God is supposed to
never allow a negative influence.
Right. I don't understand that.
Well, if you'd like to have some fanfic about this, you could read John Milton's Paradise Lost.
Right. Yeah.
And he'll explain it all to you.
Well, everyone should read that, but
they should. It doesn't take too long.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't have a problem with I mean, God has to do some things, but man has to do some things too, because God created man to do things, right? So keeping chaos agents out. I mean, doesn't seem like that's a meaningful objection, but okay, we'll keep going.
It's unclear what exactly is inaugurated by this event. We're told that original sin enters the world in this event. However, there must have already been something like a proneness to sinning with Adam and Eve, because at the very first opportunity they were given, they fell for it. And it can't be that sin entered the world through sin. That doesn't make any sense. You have to sin to bring it about. So there was already sin and already a propensity to sin. There was already evil because the serpent's in the garden. And it's implied that there was already suffering in the Garden of Eden because God punishes Eve by greatly increasing her pains in childbirth. So it's unclear to me, when they eat of the tree, what exactly it is that enters the world. Maybe mortality, we can talk about that. So there's sort of a moral objection here, that there's this crime that's committed unknowingly, without a knowledge of good and evil, fooled into doing so by the serpent, and then descendants are punished for the crime that they didn't commit. The other sort of side of this objection is to say, this is all assuming that actually, the serpent is evil and did tempt Eve. But as I said to Jordan Peterson, there are some interpretations of the story that take the side of the serpent, that say that God doesn't want them to know good and evil. He's a jealous God. He's a self-admittedly jealous God. And the serpent is the one who comes along and says, God's lying to you, right? He just doesn't want you to be like him. And when they eat of the tree, they find that they have become like him, and the serpent was completely right. Everything the serpent said came true. They did become like God, knowing good and evil. And then God proactively banishes them. It's not some natural result of their sin that they have to sort of fall away from the Garden of Eden. It's like God proactively saying, you're not allowed in here anymore.
Now, there's a lot there.
Before you go on, two things. One, I like his logo. It's cool and minimalistic, but it does look a bit like the Dairy Queen logo. But I also wanted to say, that after this show, we're going to go to Patreon, and we'll link it also for channel members. But if you want to be active in the live chat, it's actually already linked at all those places. So make sure that you're there to continue the discussion for a little while longer. Pritchett, go ahead.
Well, okay. Well, let's start with the first objection. Talking about original sin and sin entered the world. The world of what? Right? What is Romans 5 about? Two typologies, the typology of Adam and the typology of Christ, right? So Romans 5:12, wherefore, as by one man sin entered the world, and death by sin, so death passed upon all men, for all sin, or upon which all sinned, meaning upon that death, if you take my view. Okay, well, Alex O'Connor is smart enough to understand, just from reading Genesis 1, however you take the plural, right? God and his divine counsel, Trinitarian, both and, whatever. He knows, even if you just read page 1, that Yahweh is not the only being in existence, and then two other beings come into existence. I mean, number one, there's all kinds of creatures that also come into existence as well, and then you have that, but you have Yahweh speaking to somebody. So however you take that, you already know that evil exists. Now, sin is transgressing God's commands, right? So sin entering the world does not mean that there was never evil in existence anywhere. Speaking of the chaos agent of the serpent, well, chaos itself was what was tamed in the first chapter. So he knows that if there is already chaos in existence, and there are other beings, some of them may be the agents of chaos, there is already evil, but sin is the falling short, or the missing the mark, the target. It is the transgression of God's law or commands. So sin can enter the world through the one transgression of Adam without having a problem conceptually how that could happen.
Well, right, and it's like the passing it down to to, like he was talking about. Now all this affects all these other people. Well, we've already talked about what's going on with the pain in childbirth and all that, and we've already talked about, and he brought up again in summarization about all this stuff about she was tricked because she didn't know what she was getting into, when no, we've addressed that propositional experiential knowledge. There may have been a couple of things there, but in terms of the playing this out in a way that is negative for people that come after. Now, this is an important distinction, Jonathan, between the way you and I see this and people who are like-minded. And on the other hand, many Christians who believe original sin is a bit different. So you might have been raised with this notion that what we get from Adam is both a sin. Well, we would say original sin we get from Adam. That's what some would say. And I'm fine with that, depending on what you mean.
Right.
But what some mean by that is you get a sin nature, that is, to put it in the words of the Baptist Faith and Message, a nature and environment that is inclined towards sin, which happens, by the way, naturally. The more sin there is around you, created by other people, there's you have more of an environment, at least in that case, inclined towards sin. But many Christians also believe that in original sin you have a guilt nature, that you're personally culpable for the sins that Adam committed. And we find that elsewhere in Scripture that no, actually, the fact is God's clear that He doesn't hold sons culpable for their father's sins, or fathers for their sons' sins. And so for that reason, it makes more sense to me and many like-minded people to think, no, actually, you got a sin nature and everyone will end up sinning. That's different than logically saying they must all sin. They will end up sinning, everyone except Jesus, right? And so that we want to make that distinction. So then so many Christians would look at this and say, yeah, what they got was all the stuff you guys are talking about, but also they got this sin goo that went along with it that made them supernaturally people that, couldn't will to do the right thing, all these kind of things. Okay. So, but if you understand our way, then how do we explain the fact that there's an impact? Well, because the nature and environment inclined towards sin was created. There's sin all over the place, and it keeps getting worse. And it's true that what you do can impact those people that come after you, right? Like, it is true that that children are born with fetal alcohol syndrome because their mother was an alcoholic. I mean, that's a real thing. And so they're, like the children of Israel, some of them were born in captivity because of the sins of their parents, but it wasn't as though that was like something God's imposing. It was rather the natural outplay of the choices that their parents made. You're muted.
There's a lot of what I think a lot of people, whether they're Christians or not, is trying to import metaphysics at every single opportunity, right? And what I just don't see the point. Okay, to have a proclivity, because he mentioned this, to have a proclivity to where you can sin doesn't mean sin had entered the world of humans until they actually commit the sin. But the proclivity to disobey, or the ability to disobey, right, doesn't mean that sin had occurred yet, just because they could. And a lot of Christians ask a metaphysical question too that I think is ridiculous. How could they even have the possibility, if they were perfect, to sin? That means they weren't perfect. Well, God said they were very good, never said that they were perfect, never even said they didn't have the proclivity to disobey. And the fact that God told them to do something, like we just talked about earlier, where they can understand the concepts of obedience and disobedience and consequence of disobedience, the fact that they had all that presupposes that they had the possibility to disobey God. So why would you think that they were made without the proclivity to disobey? That doesn't mean,
right.
And until they do disobey, that doesn't mean sin had entered the world of human beings yet.
Right.
So I don't understand this objection, but to be fair to Alex, it comes from weird metaphysical claims that Christians have made about the garden, right? And then questions arise from their metaphysical claims that they punt to mystery. Well, I don't know if they were made perfect but yet they still could sin. Where do all these assumptions come from? It's just, that's all speculation. But Christians set themselves up for a lot of that, to be fair to Alex. So if he's harping on it, he probably heard these ideas from.
Oh, I have no doubt. I have no doubt he heard these ideas. Although I think he did get a theology degree, so I imagine he heard a spread of ideas, and so he's picking this one to talk about. Now, I get that, but another thing, just to put it real simple, is if I give someone a gun they can use that gun for good or evil. You know, maybe this isn't the best analogy for people that don't like the Second Amendment, but the fact of the matter is, if I give someone a gun, I've given them the capacity to perhaps hunt for food or defend themselves or whatever, but I've also given them the capacity that they could misuse that and do evil. And I have to say, Jonathan, so then the question becomes with Alex, I would say to Alex, no, God, by giving man libertarian freedom, gave them the potential, the gun, the potential to do good or evil with that. And so then Alex is like, oh, well, okay, but if they weren't already sinners, then how is it that they ended up doing this first chance they got? Well, first of all, I don't know that it's the first chance they got. I don't know how long this went on before they ate of the fruit, but I can tell you this much. I think there's some underlying determinism here in the way Alex is thinking about this, because he seems to be thinking something in them must have determined them to eat the tree, or else why would they eat the tree? So there has to be sin determining that or something. And I'm just saying, no, they exercise their free will. Yeah, but why? Why did they use their free will to do that? Well, what you're asking is what determined that. And we believe they're self-determined. So it's kind of question begging.
Yeah. You got anything else to add to that? That was kind of a big hairball of several objections, and I think we addressed all of them, from original sin to proclivity to all of that. So I don't think there's anything else to say about that little section of complaints. But I will just say that we have a whole thing on what happened on Biblical Rogues Gallery. Look up our Biblical Rogues Gallery playlist. Go to the section on Romans 5, 12 through 21. A lot of lively discussion, debunking misunderstandings of
Did you just come to to a video about Genesis and push your Roman series instead of my Genesis series?
Yes, because Alex O'Connor brought up the concept of original sin, and
fair enough.
He was channeling Romans 5, 12 through 21. So but yes, you should also go listen to what Braxton has to say. That I'm sure much of it has been repeated here, so you may not need to.
No, dude, I've got 30 something hours on the book of Genesis, and there's a lot here on this passage that I didn't say. And I know that because we're in a class right now going through verse by verse, and we're on chapter 12. So, but all the episodes are already there on YouTube on the playlist. And by the way, there's currently 76 people watching this right now across YouTube and Twitter. That is X. So if you're on X, hey, you could do us a real solid without spending a dime just by going over and clicking on the video and liking it and subscribing to the channel. So,
amen. That'll preach. I mean, not a Christian sermon.
I'm going to clear off a spot and preach.
Yeah. It's not a Christian sermon. It's a help our monetization sermon. Actually. So,
yeah.
Our atheist friends would say, no, that sounds like a Christian sermon, but
because we're all grifters, right?
That's right. All right, here we go.
And you could just reach out your hand and eat from the tree of life, but I'm not going to let you. I don't want you to. And so he guards the gates of Eden with a cherubim with a flaming sword. So my question to you, Jonathan, is what the hell is going on here?
And we don't get Jonathan's response on that video.
Yeah, it didn't. And I'll give you my response of what's going on.
Let's hear it.
Okay, so first off, in this video, did you link it in the description? I hope you did.
No, but I did link the Patreon after show, or how to become a patron.
There you go. Well, if you watch this video in its entirety, and I'm actually a fan of linking the videos in the description. So
I used to do that, and I need to do it.
It's not that you don't. It's not that you're against it. It's that you're lazy. Is that what I'm?
That's
hearing?
totally yes.
Yeah. Okay. So in this video, let's talk about the trees for a minute. You have the tree of life, and I think you already addressed earlier. After they had disobeyed, they were expelled from the garden, and they didn't want to remain in that state of disobedience and live. That's what God said, right? Because they could take out from the tree of life and continue to live in their disobedience.
Right.
Now, about the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the Takogi, for short.
Well, people are going to think that's Hebrew or something.
Okay, no, it's just tree of knowledge of good and evil.
You made an acronym.
Yeah.
Which is
Takogi.
More complicated than just saying it now that we've had to explain it.
But it's a lot slower. But yeah, I mean, about that tree, what does God say? of every tree you may eat freely, right, in chapter 2, but you cannot eat from this tree, for the day that you do it, you will die. Okay? What does Yahweh never say about that tree? For everyone who thinks Yahweh's even being stingy, or people who think that Yahweh's setting them up for failure. He didn't say you can never eat from it at all. He didn't say that I may not at some point feed you from this tree. He said, eat from all the other trees, just not eat from this one yourself. You may eat freely of all of them, but don't eat of this. That doesn't mean they would never have eaten it. Yahweh could have very well shared from them when Yahweh wanted to, right? There's this assumption that Yahweh held this one tree back in the middle of the garden that they were never going to be.
Well, yeah.
The text doesn't say that either.
Right, because now let me clear something up that might come to mind. Is somebody might say, well, if it's sin, if it's a tree that allows you the experience of evil, experiential knowledge of evil, then it would always be wrong to have the experiential knowledge of evil, so God could never share it with them. But here's the thing. The evil they were experiencing, as far as I take it, is that God told them not to eat from that tree. Not that there was something about the tree, is God told them don't eat from that tree. So when they did eat from it, then they were being disobedient and their eyes were open to evil, right? Because of disobedience. But if later he wanted to retract that and let them have some of the fruit from that tree, well, it might not be a tree of evil in that sense, right? Because he's allowing it. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think, again, not Alex's fault. A lot of Christians say weird things too. They make this the magical tree, right?
Mm-hmm.
The magical tree of all of a sudden, when you eat the fruit from this particular tree, it's like being plugged into the Matrix and having the ability to fly a helicopter downloaded in your brain. That's what they think is happening here. Again, not metaphysics, right? There's no reason why we should think that they downloaded a program once they bit into it, right? It was the realization of what they had done, the shame of it, right? Their nakedness before God. They realized their eyes were open to, oh, we have done something wrong and we need to hide, right? They knew it was naughty because they knew that they weren't supposed to do it, but did it.
It was naughty.
Right.
The tree was naughty in multiple senses.
Right. Let's not go there because they were naked. So, and there are takes about this is about sex, and I don't take those takes either. No, and in fact, I don't know that the tree of life itself was a super tree with metaphysical fruit that sustained life. It was that the tree of life that they had access to, God's probably doing the work of sustaining their mortality.
He's doing the work of sustaining the entire universe.
Right. So I don't believe that like they couldn't stub their toe or God preserved their life and it was represented through access to the tree that God of life that God allowed them to have as long as they stayed in obedience. So I don't think there's magical trees. I don't believe in the curses of God on the ground is God casting magical spells. I think God is just withholding a blessing for the rest of the earth that was not in the garden that he already had before he put Adam there. So it's this idea of stop reading it through metaphysical lenses and weird ideas and just get the point of what's going on here. And you will see that when it says you can't eat from this tree doesn't mean you will never eat from it ever, because God may feed from the tree to Adam and Eve, so they will have this knowledge. And there was a progression that probably God had in the first chapter where, subdue the earth, right? That there was a project for mankind to do prior to this fall of mankind. So that project was thwarted through Adam and Eve's disobedience. And really the deceit, Paul puts the disobedience to Adam and the deception to Eve. If you look at 1 Timothy 2, and then you look at Romans 5, the disobedience is squarely on Adam. So I don't think that a lot of the assumptions and ideas and speculations are warranted from the text that we have, when there's all kinds of other inferences you can make from the text that is there that seem to be a lot more valid, is what I'm saying. So earlier in this video, they talk about, did the serpent lose limbs or anything like that? You know, when God punished the serpent, I see no reason to think that occurred. Again, people are thinking about magical spells and hexes and all that stuff, and limbs falling off that serpents might have used to have.
I don't know. I'm a little different there. I'm like,
yeah, I don't get into all that, because
you might have had wings, you might have had legs, whatever, but they're gone now.
Well, if I told you, Braxton, if I told you, you will sit in the corner and pound sand. What I'm not saying is you've lost your legs. You can only sit in the corner, and then it's surrounded by quick creep playground sand that you
I know, but
depot, and you punch it in all perpetuity. You and your posterity have to punch the sand. That's
I know,
not
but
saying.
it does sound to me, I have to admit, like the whole point of a serpent here, other than the obvious motifs about, you know, serpents and everything being dangerous and scary and all that, and crafty, right? And slithering and all that, is it seems like there's an explanation given here of why serpents crawl on their belly within the confines of the story.
No, it's idiomatic. Go sit in the corner, eat dust, right? That's not a meal plan for snakes.
Yeah, but their mouths are like right there on the dust.
Right. And they crawl, and so when a snake is ready to strike, it does kind of prop up its head and its, you know, the frontal part of its, you know, whatever. I don't know biology that well, but if you've seen Indiana Jones, when the serpent, when he falls down and that snake sticks up, it's not just the head, it's, you know, part of the body, right?
And there's a sheet of see-through glass there
that where you can see his reflection. Yes, I know. We forgive 80s filmmakers, okay? Yeah. But yeah, getting back on the belly is not a dominant position. It is a more of a, you know, you are sit in the corner, you know.
Yeah, I'm not saying I think that that's not the point that's being made. I'm not necessarily saying anything about the ontology of snakes. It just seems like within the confines of the story, it looks like it's using a snake and telling us all this because it kind of fits with the way the snake on his belly has to crawl near the dust and all that matches the thematic points that we also want to say, is what it seems like to me, but I'm open to that.
Yeah. I thought eating dust had to do with death. That's yes. But it basically that it's like you get back into a docile position instead of your dominant position, and you get on your belly, you crawl on your belly. Like people, we say that to people now, you know, and sit in the corner, pound stand, eat dust, go eat whatever. Amber asks, is it a literal snake? Well, I addressed this at the beginning. I think probably. I don't think that the imagery they're trying to give us a space dragon or you know, some primordial serpent that had legs. That
they got a statue of it at the Creation Museum. You could just go look at it.
I don't think it's a dragon or a snake with legs that lost its legs, so now it crawls on its belly after that. No, I think that's the imagery that it wants you to think, in the same way that, you know, serpents are always around. You know, the magicians in Egypt are turning staffs into serpents and stuff. I think that's the imagery that the author is wanting us to see. Is
that's snake. My point.
Yeah.
My point is that, and maybe this is what Derek's talking about, is that you could have a double entendre, or he says a triple entendre, but like this is not uncommon in the Bible to have something that happened, but it's also thematically related to what the points you want to make, right?
And as far as did the snake really talk, I don't like to go the Bardian way and say, well, what's important is what the serpent said. Do I think that, you know, its mouth started moving, you know, like it was like a ventriloquist or something? I don't know. I think
I do. It doesn't, because it doesn't at the Creation Museum.
And Ken Ham knows best. I'm just saying that the serpent spoke. How? I have no idea. Don't care. It's not the point.
That's just the thing you just said you weren't going to say.
No, what I said is I think that there was a serpent there, and it probably looked like a snake, and Eve had a conversation with it, and he heard words. I don't know that it's necessarily that it was gifted with vocal cords for this particular moment any more than Balaam's donkey. I'm just saying,
no,
the serpent spoke. I think it really said words. I think we're supposed to imagine a serpent there, and whether you just heard words emanating from that direction or its mouth moving, I go with the former, but I don't know. But do I think it spoke? Yeah. Why not?
Well, is it a problem? Is the question. Like, is it a problem for the truth of the story that a serpent is said to have spoken to someone? And I'm saying, well, number one, no. The Bible has supernatural stuff in it. If you don't like supernatural stuff, go read something else. And then secondly, you want to say that, like you said, whether or not could speak with its that criticism implies is that the snake naturally speak? Well, no, that's why it's a mesmerizing story, is because snakes don't naturally speak.
Yeah. Though Eve wasn't freaked out by it speaking either, which is kind of interesting.
Although some animals do speak. I've heard some people say, well, maybe back then it was like a Disney movie and all the animals spoke. Well, and so it wasn't strange for Eve because there's a criticism of why she doesn't seem to be in shock about it. Well, I don't believe that we had like Dr. Dolittle and all the animals talking, but there actually are some animals that talk. Like you've got these, what is it, a cockatoo or a parrot or whatever that can say phrases and stuff back. But that's irrelevant. Like when people say, "Oh, you believe in a talking animal?" Well, you believe in a talking bird.
I mean, Adam. Did Adam seem to be freaked out when God talked to him?
Well, only after when he was hiding that time,
right after the fall. So yeah. I mean, I'm like, what are we talking about here? Why think?
The point is, of course, just like Jesus wasn't raised naturally. So like, well, people can't be raised from the dead, right? Not naturally. That doesn't normally happen. Well, snakes can't talk. Well, right, now naturally. We're not saying that it has the physical body to talk.
Yeah. God told him, eat whatever you want, but not from that one, not from Takogi, right? He didn't say Adam was freaked out. So why is Eve supposed to be freaked out when when the snake starts out? So I don't know. There's a lot of silly objections to this. I kind of take your given his theological education. And he's a researcher, a studious guy. He should know that these are some of the most lowbrow of objections that you could pick. So I would be more interested in what his more higher brow objections to the story would be. Principally,
the higher brow approach is to talk about the moral, how we can morally accept original sin as a result of what they did. But of course, we've given that response here.
Yeah, and of course, I don't want to speak for him, but I'm assuming, just going on a limb here, he thinks climate change is bad, right?
Probably.
Does he think climate change is bad? So he affirms that I can take actions that will have consequences for other people and the environment both.
That your human will can cause the environment to fall.
Yeah, and it can affect him, and he's not even related to me.
Right. You can do things in Evansville, Indiana, that in some way cause the world or contribute to the world being fallen because of man, such that it impacts other people with death.
Yeah, so in principle, if you affirm climate change, you really don't have an objection to the fact that why can somebody do something that has implications beyond themselves? Simple.
Yeah. Now, Seth makes a good point here that I was thinking about already. It's the biblical narrative doesn't tell us everything that we'd like to know about everything.
Right.
And so maybe they were freaked out. I'd be freaked out. Well, I guess she wasn't in danger of snakes before that, but I personally would be freaked out if I saw a snake, even if it didn't talk to me. So.
Right.
The snake wouldn't have to talk to me to get me freaked out.
Exactly. All right. Braxton, we have an after show to get to here in a few minutes. Any final words on this?
Well, yeah, number one, there are things I appreciate about Alex O'Connor, and things I admire about Alex, but, and I'm glad that he's asking these questions to someone who I don't know anything about, that Jonathan, whoever, but,
Well,
Johnny
Joe,
P. We'll call him Johnny P. I don't know much
they
about
said it was the G is a soft J, not a G.
Pago. Is that right? Pago?
You can't say go. I just told you. We were told in the chat that it is a soft J, so it's Peugeot.
Peugeot. Okay.
Peugeot.
Well, I don't know him either. I don't know Pago or Peugeot. But if he's claiming to be a Christian, I like that Alex is going to Christians who he takes to be intellectually rigorous and asking these questions.
Right. He didn't want to talk to Jordan Peterson in this video about this stuff because Jordan Peterson waxes, we're talking about the psychological and literary,
Well, the substrate of the active participle
right.
indicates chaos. It's chaos all the way down. And there was some chaos that we've talked about here.
Yeah.
But look,
allegory.
Here's the thing. However,
I'm not saying it's all allegory. I'm not saying it's all literal either. I'm just saying,
right.
Read it seriously.
Yes. And however you take this, what I would want to say to Alex is, I want to talk to you about the Bible in the way that we're talking about right here. But I want to put forward two things that I think Alex needs to consider first for the purposes of coming to Christ. And that is, what has to be true for some kind of Christianity to be true? There are two things that need to be true: that God exists and that God raised Jesus from the dead. If those two things are true, then some kind of Christian understanding is true. Something in the realm of what has been called Christianity is true. And so if you were to demonstrate, you could, if you found something in the text that seemed irreconcilable, might be a mystery. If you demonstrated a complete contradiction, well, I'd like to see that. But even if you did that shoot down Christianity? No. It maybe shot down how we understand a text or a book or whatever. But if God exists and God raised Jesus from the dead, Christianity is true. And I think Alex has been presented with a lot of evidence that God exists and God raised Jesus from the dead. And so I would just encourage him, hey, these things you'll have to work out. Some people are still working them out as we move through life in our faith. But what's very, very important right now is come to Christ once you see the good evidence for God's existence and that God raised Jesus from the dead. Come to Christ, even if you're trusting on some level, you're trusting that you don't have all the answers. And then in your Christian walk with a community of faith, like I know Alex has friends who are faithful around him, work through those things over the next several years. And I think that you'll find it enriching. And you could always go to any particular part of the Bible and say, well, how do you know this is true? Or how do you know that is true? And the fact is, we don't believe every particular part of the Bible because there's an apologetic argument for like 2 Samuel 3:4. And maybe there is. I don't know what 2 Samuel 3:4 says. But it's because we have good reason, we think, to believe that God exists, God raised Jesus from the dead, and that the Bible is generally reliable and authoritative. Now, we believe more than that about it. But that's how we approach the text. So because of the evidence we have when we approach a text, we don't presume that it's false. What we do is we say, I've got good reason to believe I can trust this already coming to the text. So if I see something that I think is a problem, let me see, is there some solution? And if there is some solution to it, well, then it's not necessarily a contradiction and a disqualifier. So I would just encourage people to think along those lines. And we should pray for Alex that he will come to faith.
Yes, and all of his followers as well.
All right, Pritchett, we're going to go to the after show. We're going to wait about 5 minutes. The link, if you're a channel member, is on a post that only channel members can see. So you go to the members section and look at the posts, and you'll see the one for today. Also, for patrons, it's already there, ready to stream, and how to become a patron to see that is linked in the description to this video. You just go to patreon.com/Trinity Radio, and for as little as $1 a month, I think it is, you can get all of it. So, all right, we'll see you next time on Trinity Radio.